Today we're going to talk about when to start using mock papers when it comes to exam preparation. Mock papers are one of the most important tools for improving your child's performance and timing. Now, you need to know this because using mock papers too early can lead to frustration and overwhelm, and leaving it too late means that your child has not used an extremely valuable learning resource or learning opportunity. By the end of this episode, you'll know exactly when to encourage your child to start using mock papers. Before we start, don't forget to join my free Facebook group where I go live. You'll find tips and resources there as well. I will make sure to drop the link in the show notes. Let's dive into today's episode. My tip number one when it comes to mock papers is using mock papers once your child understands the basics or the foundations. Now, the reason why this is important is because having a solid foundation before attempting full mock papers allows your child to apply that knowledge rather than start learning concepts while they're actually practicing using those papers. In my sessions, I recommend that students start using mock papers at around 2 to 3 months before the actual exam. The reason I do this is because they're a lot more comfortable with the main topics that they're covering for their exam. And therefore this will allow them to build on that confidence. By no means am I saying that they can't use parts of mocks. So say for example there's a question that they want to attempt and they already have knowledge of that topic, they can use that. But here I'm talking about full mock papers. I'll give you an example. One of my students started to use mock papers well in advance. Way too early, and it backfired. She felt extremely overwhelmed and frustrated. It was awful because it knocked her confidence down. After she started focusing on individual topics and built up her knowledge, she came back to mocks. And at that point, she could see a significant improvement in her grades. And that's the right way to go about it, because if you have no knowledge and you're attempting mocks, you're not going to see a drastic improvement and you're not using the resource correctly. To me, this is very important because I believe that preparation should be empowering and not discouraging, and therefore starting at the right time makes all the difference. This is a very common thing that parents will say, my child is always doing mocks, however they're not improving their grades, and this is the key thing. My tip number 2 is using mock papers to help identify weak areas. The reason why this is important is because it's a great way of spotting patterns and also areas where your child is making a mistake or could improve. In my lessons, I use mock papers as a sort of diagnostic tool to identify the areas that my students need to focus on, and I give them a checklist. So I give them personalised feedback on that particular paper, and then they have a checklist of areas that they need to focus on. This allows them to focus specifically on things that they need to improve on, and therefore that will help them improve their grades. I'll give you one of the examples regarding mocks and timings. One of my students consistently struggled with timings in their mock papers, and I suggested to them to use the mock papers in a slightly different way. Try and use them in sort of sections. You do section A and section B in separate time slots that you allocate to yourself, and then gradually build up that time to complete the entire paper rather than overwhelming them and giving them everything. So they might have the knowledge but they might start to panic. So that's also an issue that could happen. Now, this matters to me because mock papers aren't just about practicing. They're about learning from your mistakes and growing from those mistakes. So therefore, it's important to use mock papers in the most effective way. I also use parts of the mock papers to assess or to carry out an assessment on a child. So sometimes parents would like an assessment, and I use mock papers to be able to show and identify those weak areas that those children need to focus on, or those students need to focus on, and that helps come up with a very detailed plan on specific areas of focus rather than having a generalised focus. The more specific we can be on the areas that the student needs to focus on, the more they're going to improve. Tip number 3 is to ramp up mock paper practice closer to exams. Now, the closer that we get to exams, the more that mock papers help build exam stamina, help you focus on nailing the timing, and also helps you work under pressure. It's not going to be unfamiliar to you. You're going to be so familiar with this. In my sessions, I recommend doing at least one full mock paper every week in the final or in the lead up to your exam, in the final month before your exam. This helps students actually feel or simulate the exam experience and gain confidence, and it will ensure that they are very familiar with not only the time but also with what's expected of them. You can imagine a child turning up to an exam who hasn't attempted a mock in time conditions with the knowledge that they have. They're going to feel very anxious. I'll give you an example. One of my students started doing weekly mocks a month before her exam. By the time it came to her real exam, she was extremely calm and confident because she knew exactly what she was going to do under those time conditions. Even when questions that she was slightly uncomfortable with were thrown her way, she was able to manage because she'd practiced. To me, this is really important because I want my students to walk into an exam and feel prepared and self-assured. Those mocks are a perfect way to achieve this self-reassurance, and it's really important that students have that confidence before they go into the exam so that they start on a positive. So to recap this episode, the best time to start using mock exams is once they start understanding the basics, and about 2 to 3 months before the exams. Mock papers can also help you identify the weak areas, and you should use this as a learning tool. Ramp up the use of your child's mock exams closer to the exam. Do weekly mock tests in the final month to help build that confidence. Your next steps from today's episode are for you to join my Facebook group if you haven't already, where you'll find more tips and strategies to help with exam preparation. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thank you for listening. Until next time, happy studying.